Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hard-working Americans and their families?
You will! This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefits in your benefit plan. Now prepare to learn,
Plan,
save,
and protect with the Phia Group.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest installment of the Phia Group's podcast, Empowering Plans. We are now on video. I don't know who decided that podcasts should be video instead of audio, but they obviously knew how handsome Brian was. So here we are. Hi, Brian. This is Brian O'Hara, a fellow attorney at Phia, and by far one of my favorite attorneys of all the, 10,000 we have now. I don't know. It's a bunch, but I love you, Brian. I've known you for a long time. Back in my provider relations days, that's when I interviewed and we hired Brian, and he was great. And he's still great, which is good. He's not burnt out yet, but who knows, So Brian, welcome. Thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you, John, for all the kind words. My erstwhile director, I appreciate it. I've learned everything that I know. I've learned from John Jablon.
Wow.
Everything. Yes.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, good, I guess. So today we want to talk about artificial intelligence. Surprise, right? This is it's a very, very hot topic. And, our industry is no exception to that, right? I mean, the self-funded industry is no stranger to AI. Whenever there's work to be done, especially work that seems like it could be done a little bit more robotically, that's when AI comes into play. And that's when people say, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And in theory, there is, right? I mean, if AI were perfect, none of us would have jobs. If AI were perfect, I think Brian and I are both probably replaceable. Luckily for us, I guess, AI is not quite perfect yet. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about today highlight why it really is not yet the case that AI can sort of take over ordinary thinking related tasks. And frankly, based on everything we're talking about and everything we're seeing, I don't think it will ever really be the case that humans can be replaced with AI, at least in our industry, because it does require so much thought and discretion and really creativity that I suppose AI could do, but it's just not quite where it excels, right? And today on this podcast, we're going to talk about some specific examples of why. So Brian is one of our resident No Surprises Act experts, and he is very, very just alarmingly deep in the weeds in a lot of No Surprises Act related disputes. I mean, Brian, you are just like boots on the ground, No Surprises Act, like IDR, you're the guy, right? I mean, why don't you tell us about some of your experience with IDR in general, right? Forget AI for now. Just tell us a horror story. How about IDR? Because we're all in it, right?
Sure. I mean, I could go on about that for hours and hours, and nobody wants that. But IDR, independent dispute resolution, it's still kind of the Wild West out there. There are parameters on which IDREs are supposed to make determinations. The various interpretations of those parameters, of those factors, are not only vary by IDRE to IDRE, but it's clear that they vary from arbiter within each IDRE. It's very difficult to get any kind of consistency, to really find any patterns, which makes it difficult to make to make an offer. Our clients come to us, and ultimately what they decide to offer is up to the plan. But they ask for guidance, and we try to give as best as we can. And we're kind of stuck with saying our best. Here's the information that we have. We cannot really predict with any accuracy what the outcome's going to be. It's just difficult. We're seeing now IDREs award higher than billed charges uh, uh, on cases, which just to me seems ludicrous. I don't see how an award that higher than billed charges can be justified by, um, you know, uh, things like, prior payments and network contracts, things like that. I don't think that there are any network contracts out there where plans agree to pay a provider higher than its billed charges.
Oh, that's not true though, right? What about DRG payments? Sometimes you'll see a DRG payment that's higher than the bill, and it causes all sorts of problems, especially with stop loss.
Yes, well, in the case of a outlier or something of that nature, correct? Yeah.
I'm an attorney, right? So are you, but I'm always looking for like, oh, what about this weird exception where this happens? I'm always looking for a worst case scenario, but yeah, I hear you. And
yeah,
it sounds like, something that I tell people often is that once you're in court, it's like the Wild West, right? You catch the wrong judge on the wrong day and anything can happen. And it sounds like you're dealing with the same thing with the IDR entities, right? Like you catch somebody on a bad day. He had his kids were whining that morning. He comes to work, grumble, and he just, it goes rogue.
Yeah, it certainly. And I mean, I've spoken with, representatives of many different IDREs. Some are more responsive than others. Some, if you have a problem, there's absolutely no way to get in touch with them, and you just have to accept the fact that this problem exists forever. But the IDREs, to their credit, they're trying. They're trying to be consistent. They're kind of stuck with the guidance that they've been given, which by CMS and by the departments, and frankly, it's just not always clear. Sure. The factors on which IDRs are determined, really, it's strange. It's things like patient acuity, typical outcomes, all of these things that are kind of ancillary to payment, but ultimately, the only thing an IDRE is supposed to be determining is the appropriate payable amount. So you would think that would be a data-driven calculation. But providers are submitting they're submitting medical records, they're submitting these flowery curriculum vitaes that just don't really, it doesn't advance any kind of nexus between the amount they're asking and the evidence presented. I don't disagree that this doctor went to Eastern Texas Medical School and that he did a residency and that he is board certified. I don't disagree that he's a doctor. You have proven that the doctor is in fact a doctor. Why does that mean he gets $5,000 for the professional component of a 99283? I don't know because there's no info given, but if they like his submission better, then they win. So it's a frustrating process, and it definitely needs some revamping, in my humble opinion.
Okay. Well, that's good stuff. I mean, it's not good, right? But it's good information. And so let's pivot to AI, right?
Yeah.
When ChatGPT first came out, I mean, I for one, I've always been kind of a computer guy, but I was really excited, right? I still am, right? I love playing around with AI. But one of the first things I did was, let's see how smart it is. Let's see what it can help with. So I searched for some rudimentary case law. I said, find me case law on this thing that I knew was not going to be the case, right? I did something regarding overpayments. And it came back and immediately said, oh, pursuant to this case on page whatever, medical providers are legally required to refund any amounts that have been overpaid by a health plan. And my reaction was like, wait, what? Like this is completely different from all the law that we have ever seen. So I feverishly went to research the case, only to find that it didn't exist at all. It was what was called an AI hallucination. And those happen all too often, where it literally just makes stuff up. And at that point, I decided, okay, AI is great and all. It's great for creativity. And when my 6-year-old wants me to tell it a story and I don't have the energy to think of one, ChatGPT will do a great job telling me a story. But when it comes to real research and logic, it is not always the best. And so I think, Brian, you have begun to see some providers using AI, right? And it hasn't gone, I mean, maybe it hasn't been quite as bad as just inventing case law, but tell us about it because it sounds like it hasn't been amazing.
Before I get to that, I would just like to note that John has tacitly admitted that AI cannot replace him as an attorney just yet, but it can replace him as a father.
As a dad.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's good to know. But you are correct. We've seen providers beginning to utilize AI for their NSA claims. There's one provider in particular that we see quite often. I'm not going to name this provider. It's actually not a provider. It's kind of a boutique billing agency that works on behalf of providers, mainly professional emergency physician groups, neuromonitoring groups, things of that nature. On their website, they've noted that they have built a quote unquote proprietary platform that doesn't just manage IDR, it transforms it. And they refer to their services as utilizing advanced technology and being AI driven. And, it's not just used for identifying claims or processing payment, kind of those administrative tasks that you might be thinking of. We're actually starting to see AI be utilized for the actual negotiation period. John, I don't know if you've ever tried negotiating with a bot. It's not exactly the easiest thing in the world to do. I have a couple of examples of interactions that I've had with this, and we have countless interactions, unfortunately, with this provider billing agency. But for example, in response to a basic just initial email with an offer, I received a response. It was about 2 weeks later that said, upon reviewing the information you provided, we have identified inaccuracies that prevent us from continuing negotiations. And then they go on to pontificate that it's essential that both parties engage in these discussions in good faith, providing inaccurate and incomplete information does not meet that standard. And then asks me for more information. This provided me absolutely no specific information about what the inaccuracy was. It also went to a different case handler than who had initially emailed, which is a whole nother issue. It seems like it was just a bug in the system that prompted a completely nonsensical response. I had another similar case, an email response to a basic initial email. And this is kind of their template response, but it says, we acknowledge the rejection of our offer for claim, and then in brackets, it says claim number. It doesn't actually give a claim number. It just in brackets says claim number and the counteroffer you have provided. Now, the fact that it's in brackets means that this is an automated response that's supposed to automatically fill. This is not someone looking at the claim number and reviewing it and saying, okay, let me look at this offer and see what I think of it. They go on, the amount you proposed is significantly below a reasonable resolution based on the facts of this claim. There are no facts given in this claim.
And that's the form letter if I've ever heard one.
Yes, yeah. And then they ask us to review their counteroffer of an amount of money that was $3,000 higher than their initial offer. When I called them on this, I responded, and I'm like, this doesn't really make any sense. I got a response that said that due to a technical error, we inadvertently submitted an incorrect offer amount. This time they had the claim number in there, so they must have fixed that bug. And sent a revised counteroffer. This is the response that you get all the time from this billing agency and from other billing agencies that are starting to use this. There's these generic references to facts without actually discussing any of the specifics of the claim. There's no counteroffer. It just basically says please negotiate against yourself until our bot determines that you've reached an arbitrary amount that we'll accept, basically.
So, Brian, in your professional opinion, does this meet the standard that the No Surprises Act requires for good faith negotiations? It's a leading question.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, all right.
Absolutely not. And the regulations actually do say that the guidance put out by CMS says that the parties should negotiate in good faith to reach a resolution. I don't know how you can make a good faith offer from a bot. It just doesn't make any sense. Negotiations are, in my opinion, something that is like, it just requires a human. It involves sharing data, market-based, or making evidence-based arguments. It's something that requires like a recipient to read, to understand, to process, to reason. AI, as it works right now, it doesn't provide any information or data that's specific to a claim. If you make an argument, that, hey, the typical length of stay for this DRG is 7 days. The patient was only here for 2 days. Your request for X amount really doesn't make any sense. The AI has no, at least as I've seen, has no ability to look at that and say, oh, that's a reasonable argument. We actually maybe should take a little bit less or something like that. Similarly, if I were to be replaced, God forbid, and a provider were to say, hey, listen, the coding doesn't really do this justice. This was a particularly high acuity claim. I don't think that on our end, a bot would be able to kind of process that and go back to the client and say, listen, here's why they asked for extra money. This actually is good reasoning, something like that. So I just don't see how how you can have a good faith negotiation using AI. And if it gets to the point where AI is just talking to AI on one of the, I feel like there might be an explosion or something. What are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, no, that's actually what I was thinking is that, if a provider or billing office is using AI, what happens when payers start using AI as well? And then it's AI negotiating with AI. You're going to come out with some truly absurd results, right? Because when the logic is so robotic yet flawed, I mean, when your premises are flawed, your conclusion can't be right. So anything can happen, and it's kind of scary. And one of the things, so I would venture that most of the folks listening to this podcast probably know Jason Davis in some regard, right? I worked very closely with Jason for a long time during my tenure at Phia, and I love him. Jason's a fantastic guy. He's a great mentor, and he's just fantastic. One of the main things that I learned from him is that rapport is one of the most important parts of a real meaningful negotiation, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not good faith to negotiate without a rapport, because obviously that's crazy, right? But rapport is important for ongoing relationships, especially. If you're going to be dealing with the same office or the same provider a bunch of times, it's important to establish a relationship. You can't have rapport. You can't have a relationship with a bot. So it doesn't fit into the typical mold, right? And when we're talking about good faith,
tell that to Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, that was a weird movie. But no, when we're talking about good faith, I think it's a different conversation than just sort of a meaningful, like, true negotiation in the real spirit of actually reaching, reasoned conclusions. And you brought up the example of a DRG that's typically for 7 days, but really this only lasted 2 days. I think you're absolutely right that, a bot is by definition robotic, right? And you're looking at a DRG and saying, this was this DRG, therefore this amount. Yeah. But in real life, things are not always that simple. And I think that nuance can be either programmed into an AI, but more likely lost on an AI, right? I mean, especially if you're programming the AI in order to negotiate strongly and firmly. But if you're training an AI to negotiate sort of reasonably and in good faith, it might compel a different result. But it sounds like, from what you've seen, the AIs that you're negotiating with were not trained to operate in an abundance of good faith, but just to very strictly enforce certain numbers. And that's not really in the spirit of a true good faith negotiation, probably.
You could, accomplish the same thing basically with an out of office email.
Mm-hmm.
And just instead of having AI, just say, we're not going to negotiate. If you want to send an offer for 95% of bill charges, let us know. Something like that.
Or like a standard response that just denies the first offer, denies the second offer. Is that negotiation? No. If your policy is just say no, offer lower, that's not a real negotiation.
Yeah. And it's it's certainly it's having its effects on our kind of day-to-day operations. This particular billing agency is probably the biggest offender, but we see a number of billing agencies that kind of are doing the same thing. And they are routinely initiating IDR on in-network claims. They're initiating IDR on professional claims that took place at facilities that aren't in network and therefore don't fall under that provision of the NSA. There's this particular billing agency apparently found a random email address that they have decided that most of our clients use, even though it has no affiliation with them, and even though the correct email address for open negotiations and IDR is listed on the EOB as it's supposed to be. And there's no way of getting them to update it. Myself and my case handlers, every email that we send to this bot, even though we know it's a bot, we will put, a million times, if you elect to file for IDR, please use nsa@phiagroup.com as is listed on the EOB. And every time they initiate or IDR, it goes to some random email address that isn't associated with any of our clients, which is very problematic because in order to enter the federal IDR portal, you need a unique link from that email. I've been successfully able to get a number of these dismissed on those grounds, but it requires a significant amount of administrative effort and burden to go out and try to find these things. If you don't get notice of the case, then you don't know if there's actually an IDR or not. You have to just, you're kind of working blind. And it really, the IDR system in general, I think is heavily flawed. And I think that it's particularly burdensome for self-funded plans. But with this use of AI, where they're just kind of making this an automated process, it's making it even more difficult.
Okay. Well, that is fantastic insight, and thank you for sharing it. And I'm sure that we will talk about this again, but for now, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you so much. We will, if you've got any questions, if there's any other insight we can give you, feel free to reach out. And thanks again. We'll talk soon.